He had always been told to turn it down. From the earliest days in classrooms where his voice carried farther than the walls could hold to office meetings where his tone cut through the sterile quiet of productivity, people reacted to him the same way, with discomfort masked as advice. "You're passionate," they'd say, "but you might want to dial it back." They never told him what it was. Just that he had too much of it. He didn't yell. He just spoke with his chest. With conviction. With that kind of energy that made people listen even when they didn't want to. And it wasn't the volume they hated, it was the way it forced them to feel. To confront something they'd rather leave untouched. At work, it started subtly. Raised eyebrows in meetings. Side glances when he spoke up during group discussions. A manager who suggested one-on-ones instead of team presentations. He was labeled intense. High energy. Needs polish. No one could deny his results. Projects finished early, teams rallied when they faltered, problems surfaced before they exploded, but still, they said the same thing: "You're too loud." He tried once to adjust. To speak softer, slower, less. To use more questions than statements. The meetings went quieter. So did the results. His energy was contagious, but when dampened, it disappeared. People stopped reacting to him. He felt like a shell moving through fluorescent light. That week, he went home every day with a headache, not from the work, but from swallowing his voice. Then came the announcement. A company summit. Internal, but large. All hands. A stage. Spotlights. 5 minutes given to a handful of diverse voices to share something inspiring. It was optional, but encouraged. His name wasn't originally on the list. Someone submitted it without telling him. He didn't know who. But when he got the email, he didn't hesitate. He didn't plan a speech. Not in the traditional sense. No slides. No bullet points. No rehearsed script. Just 5 minutes to finally say what he couldn't fit into spreadsheets and polite emails. The day came. He stood backstage waiting for his cue. He watched others go before him, well-dressed, well-practiced, perfectly within the bounds of corporate comfort. They thanked their teams, quoted TED Talks, closed with applause. His name was called. The host smiled a little too wide, as if bracing for something unmanageable. He stepped into the light, looked out, took a breath, and didn't apologize. He spoke like he always had, clear, loud, unflinching. He told them about the meetings where his voice was the only one asked to quiet down. About the performance reviews that complimented his results and criticized his delivery. About being told he had potential if only he'd learned to be less. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. He ended with a question. What if the problem isn't that I'm too loud, but that you've all forgotten how to listen? Silence followed. Then polite clapping. Scattered. Contained. He stepped off the stage without looking back. No one said anything. Not that day. But someone, no one knew who, posted the clip online. The caption was simple. He said what I've always felt. And the world listened. He woke up the next morning to dozens of notifications. At first, he thought it was a system glitch. His phone buzzed with unfamiliar names, mentions, reposts. Messages from old classmates, distant colleagues, people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some just sent the link. Others sent 2 words, "Thank you." The video had exploded overnight. No branding. No editing. Just 5 raw minutes under harsh stage lights, captured on a phone camera with shaky framing and terrible acoustics. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the voice, the tone, the rhythm, the unfiltered truth spoken in a space designed to suppress it. People didn't just hear him. They felt him. 10,000 views turned into 100,000 before noon. By evening, it had crossed 1 million. By the end of the week, it was on the front page of every platform with a trending section. Commentary videos dissected every line. Audio remixes turned it into spoken word anthems. HR departments quietly forwarded it to leadership teams, urging perspective. And in offices across the world, people who had once been told they were too loud played it with headphones in, nodding like someone had finally broken the spell. But inside the company, the reaction was colder. They didn't like attention they didn't manufacture. The director of communications sent a neutral-sounding memo about employee representation. The VP of HR scheduled a temperature check meeting. His direct manager, who hadn't attended the summit, knocked on his door with a tight smile and said, "Let's talk." They asked how the video got out. He said he didn't know. They asked if he understood the potential reputational implications. He said, "For who?" No one laughed. They reminded him that he spoke at a private event. He reminded them that they gave him a microphone. The conversation ended with a vague warning disguised as advice. "You've got eyes on you now. Tread carefully." He nodded, but not in agreement, in understanding, because the moment they feared being seen was the moment he realized how much of the truth had been hidden. He went back to work, back to fixing things, back to carrying projects over finish lines others had abandoned. His energy didn't change. His tone didn't soften. And now people listened differently. They leaned in, even the ones who used to flinch. The clip had done something the building could not. It made him real. Not just inside the company. Outside of it, he started receiving invitations, panels, podcasts, requests to speak at universities and conferences. He didn't say yes to most of them. Not yet. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing impact. And the people who used to ask him to sit down were now asking him how to stand up. But he knew this wasn't over. Virality fades. Systems resist. He wasn't done speaking. He was just getting started. The third week after the speech was when the fracture became visible. Not a break. A shift. Small at first, barely noticeable. But undeniable. Like a building settling. Revealing cracks that had always been there. Only now the light knew how to find them. People stopped whispering around him. They started speaking to him. Questions that used to be filtered through hierarchy were brought to his desk directly. Concerns that used to be buried in polite language came out whole. He didn't ask for power. He just didn't pretend anymore. His meetings changed. No one asked him to tone it down now. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. The energy that once made people uncomfortable now kept projects alive. Deadlines were met with his momentum. Ideas that had stalled for months gained speed under his voice. But not everyone liked it. Some of the senior staff started pushing back, softly. They questioned his influence, asked whether he was distracting from the brand. One director said the word disruptive, with a tone that was meant to sound objective, but landed like a bruise. Still, no one told him to stop, because outside the building, the world had already decided. Clips of his talk were now being used in leadership training. College classes broke down his delivery, not for its technique, but for its truth. A publisher reached out. A documentary team sent a proposal. It wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a symbol. And inside the company, the ones who used to be quiet began to speak. They came to him. Not loudly, but fully. They told him their stories, how they'd been told to stay in their lane, to not make waves, to play the game. They asked him how he kept going when they were still afraid. He didn't give them a formula. He gave them space. He asked them what they wanted to say. Then he helped them say it. A culture had begun to form, not led by him, energized by him. A new intern posted a clip of a team huddle he led. The caption read, "They said he was too loud, but maybe volume is what breaks ceilings." It went viral too. Leadership took notice. The CEO called a private meeting. No agenda, just presence. The room was quiet. The CEO asked him what he wanted. He said, "I want the people who whisper brilliance to stop being edited out of the room." There was a long pause. Then the CEO said, "You're creating something we can't manage." He nodded. "You were never supposed to." Later that day, he was invited to speak at an all-hands meeting. This time, there was no hesitation, no disclaimer, no limits, and no one dared to call him too loud anymore. Because now they knew. He wasn't just speaking, he was echoing everything they never had the chance to say. By the fourth month, his voice was no longer just a sound. It had become a signal. People tuned into what he said not out of obligation, but out of anticipation. Inside the building, staff began shaping meetings differently, more space, less formality, real time for expression. Departments started integrating moments of open mic in their weekly check-ins. Anonymous surveys dropped in usage because more people were comfortable just saying what they meant out loud. A shift was underway. And still, he didn't ask for a promotion. He didn't demand a title. He just showed up. Every day. Same energy. Same volume. Same refusal to shrink. But now the pressure came from outside. Media wanted more. Commentators speculated on his next move. Industry insiders whispered that he could be poached. Offers arrived 6 figures, then 7 from companies that once overlooked him and now wanted to use his name as a brand. He declined, not because of loyalty to his employer, but because he wasn't done building what he had started. One day, a senior executive pulled him aside after a strategy session. "You know," he said, "people are listening to you now. It might be time to refine your delivery." He smiled. "You mean lower my voice again?" The executive didn't respond, because he knew what that meant. Refinement in most companies was just suppression with better vocabulary. And he wouldn't go back. He couldn't. That week, he was invited to speak at a national conference. He said yes. Not for the stage. For the people in the back rows who always left inspired but never heard themselves reflected. He walked into the hall wearing the same black shirt he always wore when he needed to say something that mattered. No blazer. No teleprompter. Just him and a handheld mic. The talk didn't start with applause. It started with silence and ended with standing ovation. But what mattered most happened after the lights came up. A young woman approached, tears in her eyes. She said, "They told me I was too much, too opinionated, too everything. But after you spoke, I realized maybe I'm just enough." He nodded, because he knew. The power of a voice wasn't in its decibels. It was in its permission. And every time he used his, someone else found theirs. By the 5th month, he was no longer just a name inside a company, he had become a symbol outside of it. His voice had turned into shorthand for truth. Clips of his speeches were stitched into content across the internet, quoted on posters, echoed in classrooms. Students recited his words in debate clubs. Corporate coaches referenced his presence in slides titled "Authentic Communication." But inside the building that had once tried to soften him, the tone was shifting again, this time from discomfort to calculation. He was a brand now, and brands come with value. The leadership team began to position him carefully. His image appeared in internal newsletters. They invited him to represent the company at diversity forums, not because they finally understood him, but because it made them look like they had. They wanted to repackage his energy into something that could fit in a deck. Slide 5, culture, vibrancy, voice. He noticed. He watched the same people who once winced at his cadence now rehearse their proximity to it. They used his phrases in meetings. They mimicked his tone when speaking to younger staff. They started introducing him as our very own thought leader. He said nothing. For a while. But then he saw what it was doing to the others. The ones who had found courage in his words were now being coached on how to express them constructively. The louder ones were getting subtle feedback. The passionate ones were labeled challenging. It was happening again. Only now it was dressed better. He pulled back. Not out of defeat. Out of strategy. He spent time with teams outside the spotlight, logistics, fulfillment, tech support. He listened to their stories. Found their rhythms. He created space where no one had to rehearse how they felt. He held unofficial listening hours, not meetings, just moments. No recording, no agenda. And word spread. Not through email. Through people. That there was still a place where you could be loud. Not rude. Not reckless. Real. One day, a young analyst stood up during a product meeting and challenged an entire roadmap. She didn't ask for permission. She laid out data. She spoke quickly, emotionally, fully. And when the room went quiet, unsure of how to respond, he clapped first. Then others joined. The idea got approved. And she didn't stop smiling for 3 days. Later that week, she stopped by his desk. Asked him what he thought her future could be. He said, "Louder." She laughed. But he meant it. Because silence in rooms like these was never neutral. It was surrender. And he wasn't here for surrender. He was here for resonance. The 6th month arrived without fireworks. There were no viral clips, no trending tags, no overnight milestones. Just a slow, steady current running through every hallway he walked. His voice had done its work. It had broken something. Not the company. The silence. The kind of silence that looks like structure but feels like a cage. The kind that whispers, "Stay small to stay safe." He didn't speak as often now. Not because he had less to say. Because more people were speaking. In their own ways. With their own volume. In meetings, bold ideas no longer echoed awkwardly. They landed. Colleagues who once avoided hard truths now leaned into them. Managers who used to measure contributions in decibels learned to listen in dimensions. And across the company there was a rhythm. A pulse. It didn't belong to him. It belonged to everyone who had once waited to be heard and now simply took their place. He still got invitations. External stages. Panels. Publishers. He said no to most of them. He knew how easy it was to get pulled into performance. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to be a shift. The CEO called him in one morning. Not for a reprimand. For recognition. They offered him a role. Chief Culture Officer. He smiled. Declined. He said culture isn't a title. He didn't want to manage the system. He wanted to keep disrupting it just enough so it never went back to sleep. Instead, he proposed something else. A space inside the company. Not an office. A room. No agenda. No slides. Just a space where people could come to say what needed saying. Call it the loud room. At first, it sounded like a joke. But it became real. And they came. The shy ones. The angry ones. The visionaries with broken sentences and unstoppable fire. They came and they filled it. Every day. Not to yell. To feel heard. And one day he walked past that room and saw a young man standing at the front. Nervous. Hands shaking. Voice cracking. But he kept going. And no one interrupted. No one told him to quiet down. No one gave him notes on tone. And when he finished, someone clapped. Then another. Then all of them. He didn't know the man was watching from the hallway. He didn't need to. The room was working. The culture had shifted. And his voice? It wasn't viral anymore. It was permanent. Not because people copied it, but because it gave them the courage to find their own. And in a world that had once told him he was too loud, he left behind a truth louder than anything he ever said on stage. Every voice has volume. Some just haven't been turned up yet.